Any other members seek recognition? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Mfume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to offer some perspective and perhaps something for the sponsor of this bill to think about. We really are debating something that's very, very basic to all of us, and that is whether or not we believe in the imposition of policy without participation of those who are being imposed upon. I mean, this is what the Boston Tea Party was about. Okay. This is why you hear in D.C. taxation without representation. This is why we don't even have a voting member in the House of Delegates outside of a delegate, because of this situation where we believe that we can impose policy without participation from the people who are being governed. Now, I want to just ask the sponsor of the bill a question. You said, sir, and with all due respect, that there was so much here you didn't understand, and one of the things you didn't understand was why we, I assume that meant those of us on this side of the aisle, wanted to protect drug dealers. I'm making the assumption you really didn't mean that the way you said it. I hope it was rhetorical, because it's clear that members on this side of the aisle are just as opposed to crime, drug dealers, lunatics, rapists, and anybody else as you are on your side of the aisle.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I will not yield just yet. So I'm assuming it was rhetorical, that you did not have an underlying assumption that we are somehow protecting and supporting those sorts of criminals. Now, this whole thing about imposition of policy, none of us, if we are honest, would have any kind of situation in our district like this unless we raised holy hell. We would lay down and tie up the government before we would let policy be imposed on us and the people we represent. Right or wrong, there is a practice here, and we ought to at least recognize and say there is a practice. For those members on this side of the aisle, and I'm speaking now just for myself, but I assume that the others will agree, there is no safe haven for rapists and for murderers and for child molesters and criminals. There ought never be. In fact, they ought to be put underneath the jail, sir. And there is no real safe haven that anybody is advocating. Now, let me just dial back for a minute to a time when dinosaurs ruled this earth. Way back in 1987, I met at the White House with President Reagan, with Congressman Fauntroy, who represented the district at that time, to talk about this whole notion of home rule and the people of D.C. having an opportunity to govern themselves. If you'll check the record, the president at that time supported that. He believed in it, and he advocated that we find a way, whenever we want to do something, to have a conversation with the people that are being governed. I don't know that that conversation has occurred. I've not seen a meeting anywhere where we've gone out into the community as a committee to try to have that conversation. I have voted for every pro-DC act here in the Congress since 1987, so I've got a long telescope of what's been happening and what's not been happening. I sponsored and voted for the first bill to provide D.C. statehood in 1993. I have worked with Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton on all since then, including the one that we barely lost 2 years ago. So when people here get upset, it's not because they just don't have anything to do. You wouldn't want somebody imposing policy on you unless you had a chance, no matter what the law was, to give your side of the story, to hear what you have to say, and to understand your position. So let me just say that this whole imposition of policy, I know what the Constitution says. I know about the district being governed by the Congress and the president. I understand that. But let me remind you, Donald Trump was president for 4 years. Crime in D.C. was higher when he was president. Crime now has gone down significantly to 30-year lows. So I don't understand what happened between the first term in office and the second term to suggest that there is something out of control here. That is not really the case. And if he does believe that, I would say to the president and his people, why not have a conversation with the people who are being governed here? Whether you agree with them or not, they have a say. They are Americans. They pay taxes. They serve in the military. They do all the things everybody else can do, except they, in this instance, have to live with your imposition of policy. So while the gentleman who introduced this may have great intentions, I would just say, in the rhetoric around the bill, let's not make the assumption that people in D.C. like being led. Let's not make the assumption that Democrats support crime. Let's not make the assumption that God Almighty has bestowed upon you something that is lacking upon others because you have a difference of opinion. I will vote no on this bill, no on the others that come up that seek to do the same thing, and hell no on final passage. I yield back.
All right, gentleman yields back.